minor histories in ways that recognize the duplicity of the deployment of the exception and the mistake, deployments that function as smoke screens for U.S. empire's deliberate disregard for life. In doing so, they illustrate the importance of various registers of memory in disrupting such imperialist logics and underscore the potential of unofficial archival forms, living archives, to do the recursive work of accounting for the present as they also account for the past. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Lina, for your interesting talk. So I am sure there should be more interesting questions to be discussed now. So do you have any questions, please?
Just for information, I suppose you must be aware of the research done by anthropologists who did a PhD on the remains of war in Roman
On the remains of war?
Yes.
What do you mean by remains?
The title of the PhD is that we and she is a French anthropologist research in Scotland. She's the director of skills.
Yes, oh, yeah. I remember. Yeah, I haven't actually spoken, I haven't had an opportunity to speak with them. Why am I blanking on it? Krishna, I'm Krishna, but we were in contact about her dissertation project, right? So she did an ethnographic study where she spent a lot of time in a village in Ethnography doing work on remnants, talking to villagers about the bombings, yeah. I really need a longer conversation with Krishna.
Also, another thing, you mentioned a few sources which are wrong about the map that you show. Maybe it's not important matter for the information, which has been done by Kerman and another guy. The starting to gun didn't start in 64 or 65 in Cambodia. They started in 52. But when I asked people who make the count where they got their sources, they just got the source for second-hand information from people who maybe didn't conduct themselves first-hand investigation. Like us anthropologists, we are conducting anthropological investigation. It's a oral story. Is to some extent more consistent, and we have some can be positioned sometimes into reliable sources which are more reliable than what is officially said in some books which repeats one by one the same thing.
Is there a source that I should read about the bombing starting in 62 instead of 64, or?
Which will be we don't and yeah, we can do
Because I mean, so I'm leaving Cambodia in a little over a week, and I will be doing work at the Nixon, well, that wouldn't be at Nixon's archives, but I have to go to Johnson's library, but I'm going to be looking at U.S. documents.
Even in the archive, it's not sure to mention.
Right.
For instance, what has been going on in the house has been disclosed quite recently. It was the same time, from 3, 4, rather than.
So is the 62 coming from like interviews with that figure 1962, is that coming from interviews with people, or?
Well, first, yeah, but not one person. People who have been directly living the place where doing towns. And some of them even belong to some rural society. They can remember. But besides this, there are other sources which are more officially recorded, which can be, to some extent, put in parallel.
I'd be interested to hear more about you switching your PhD program and the memory issues. You know, the silences. You talked a little bit about silences.
Yeah, no, so I started a long time ago. I was in, so I started a program, a PhD program in social psychology, and I was in that particular program for 3 years. I started a project where I was collecting these oral histories. But I think that some of it has changed. I cannot remember her name, but I've read some newer stuff in psychology where there isn't the same sort of framework, but almost overwhelmingly, what you get when you read about the Cambodian genocide in like psychological journals is PTSD, and PTSD itself is very problematic. Like this sort of assumption already that there's this cross-cultural, what's the word I'm looking for? As if we can simply place onto a different situation, something that was very specific, like PTSD emerged out of soldiers coming back from the war with these particular symptoms, and even though PTSD itself was supposed to be a diagnosis that was supposed to be empowering, I don't necessarily think that it takes into account violence that's much more structural. And so a lot of what you get in psychology is either this PTSD narrative or this narrative where, people can, I think it's really interesting. I don't know, I might go in a different direction too, because there's a lot of literature in psychology about Cambodian Americans, because those are the populations they're doing work on, as being like resistant, as if, there's all this stuff around the conspiracy of silence, this culture of silence that we have around the genocide. We don't want to talk about it. But just traveling with family, and and not just my family, but traveling with family and speaking to people, and we don't ask questions. People just volunteer, And so I think it has a lot to do with the structure of the interview. It has a lot to do with, I think, maybe again, I think cultural. There's, I think there's something cultural happening. And at the end of the day, I was just uncomfortable with applying those particular frameworks to my family's stories. And also it was interesting because silence was showing up a lot in the interviews that I was doing, and I didn't think that any of the frameworks available to me at the time were apt. Like it didn't seem to work for what I was collecting. Yes?
Okay, so my name is Jason Gill. I'm from the Society Museum. I'm Vice Museum. So I'm sorry, I thought it was wrong because I can't get on half of the question. Because first I talk about emotion, and then I have a question for you. Because I was working at DCM in 2003, and because my wife was a volunteer, and my father, he was a former director, director at Rosemary in 1986 to 2010. And I know about the DC camp because in 1995, two prime ministers we got agreement for DC camp to copy all the documents to DC camp. But I think I saw that the version of DC camp. But about the slide, it's really more information. So my email shows that I wrote in my music that I know about the genocide history in Cambodian, especially my museum I wrote about. I'm so happy if you wrote something about the museum more, because today museum a lot of countries or job looking for peace. Especially we go for artist program, when we go to school and we explain to children about the peace we meet and about the SPP1. Of course now a lot of students they're happy with this situation now because I explained that when I was born in 1981 I saw the situation in my country all the time today. The country damaged. Genocide war is a different word, but after the genocide, after the war, people got the same suffering, right? And they understand now about this, and they hope that our program could be understand. I understand now that the less information, less education about the genocide in school. So for my idea, so why you didn't write a lot about the S21? Because by my understanding about the BCCC, about the case 001, all documents from ECM, some documents did not accept. They said that I need sign from director S21. Then I agree, this is the evidence from S21. So, question why?
I think because I think that it's a little bit beyond the scope of this particular paper, because the argument I'm making is about how particular forms of like, very dominant forms of memory making in Cambodia really are eliding, they're erasing kind of, this imperialist violence that happened pre-Khmer Rouge. And so I use DCCAM as my case study because it is sort of, it's positioned itself as sort of the repository of most primary documents from that particular period. And I think it would sort of shift the focus of the paper if I spoke about tool slaying. And there are a lot of scholars writing about tool slaying and the sort of the politics of memory making and atrocity, genocide, and all of that's happening in Cambodia. But I think in terms of this particular paper, it wouldn't make sense.
Just for me, this level poster and project, they write thesis about PhD science. For me, I think you can go for this. The second piece.
Yeah, thanks for your speech. I would like to ask you if you would summarize what you presented here. What would be your main basis? What is the most important thing you would like to present us? Because you opened a lot of fields, and sometimes it's a little bit difficult for me to find a structure. So, what's the main thing? Because it obviously can't be that there are different perceptions regarding historical events, that there are different narratives. So, these are interesting.
So I think my main sort of this was not my initial project. So I got interested in this project when we did that second interview with our father. And that particular series of when we asked him, did you know anything, because he was a loyal soldier during the Civil War, and we asked him, did you know anything about bombings? And then we found it really curious that he, in the initial interview, the oral history interview in 2009, which was, over 2 hours, he never mentioned nearly dying from being at Net Luang. And it's so interesting, after that follow-up interview when we asked him directly, he's like, oh yeah, I almost died during one of the mistaken bombings. And I found it really interesting, and it made me think about how there's this sort of narrative that a lot of survivors, and I think I would reference Mina Das in how I'm framing this, because she really talks about the ways in which, there's a narrative that I think people recognize that they should tell. And that's sort of this dominant hegemonic narrative about Cambodian history being this tragedy sort of bookended by the events of the genocide. And it's very fascinating to me that he almost died at multiple points. But a lot of the times that he almost died actually happened pre-genocide. But there's a way in which these sort of hegemonic narratives we have of tragedy and loss being just about this particular historical event really erases what happens before and after. And the before and after is just as important. And my argument is that a lot of why we erase what becomes, and it's not about erasure, so that's why I also use Yonyama, because there's a way in which, like I said at the very beginning of this presentation, all historical texts, almost all historical texts about Cambodia mention the US bombing campaigns. But it's this, what she calls forgetting of forgetfulness. There's a way in which you write about colonial and imperial crimes in order to not reckon with them. So that's what she's specifically talking about Japanese imperial crimes during World War II. But she's talking about the government sort of, talking about them, acknowledging them, but really that actually worries her more than there being an erasure. So for me, I'm saying, like, for instance, like The Killing Fields, that particular film, we get this sort of reference to Net Lune, but that isn't the point that people walk away with, right? So it's sort of like footnoting of the violence of empire that is really interesting to me. And so the point of this particular project is to really speak about how these logics are working in dominant forms of memory making. So specifically using the archival case, because I think archives right now are really fascinating for Cambodia, especially with the with the tribunal happening. I don't know if that made any sense, but so that's where I'm coming from. Yeah.
I'd like to know why you focus on institutionalized memory and you never speak except your father. You never speak about, just ordinary people, ordinary memory of ordinary people. It's quite strange for an anthropologist.
I mean, I think I'm not an anthropologist. I'm in an interdisciplinary program, and my dissertation project is really supposed to be about epistemology, structures of knowledge, these cohort logics, sort of frame. So Jody Kim using Yonyama, these sort of theorists talking about the kinds of structures of knowledge that produce what kinds of forms of memory making and narratives about history that we end up receiving. So I'm not an anthropologist. I did do the oral history project, and like I said, I walked away feeling very conflicted. I actually have a really long footnote about that, and I almost feel like there was something inherently exploitative in sort of trying to extract trauma stories. And I still struggle because I think oral history projects are incredibly invaluable, and the interview is an incredibly generative, modality for talking about experience. But at the same time, there was something about that particular experience that left me feeling quite disturbed. And so I decided not to do interviews when I came to Cambodia. So I've been mostly working with archival
Fieldwork is
documents.
not necessarily interviews.
I'm sorry.
I mean, fieldwork in anthropology or whatsoever, it's not, you can work without interviews.
Right. And I not for the scope of this project, but this is actually not my dissertation project necessarily. This is a very small piece.
Epistemology and so on. One wonders why you choose these specific artists and why not another one. So this is also should be also part of
I mean, it was really serendipitous how I ended up coming to Rathan's work, and I thought it was really interesting. I've been to a lot of art exhibits while I've been in Cambodia, and I think his work is the most explicitly it's the most explicitly art, but also documentation, and that's what really fascinated me since I was working with archives. So that's why I think Rathan's work really resonated with me, because a lot of the work here isn't strict documentation. And what's really interesting about that video that he has on his YouTube page is that he actually uses archival footage from Montana. And I think, that makes his work, that I think is a unique element of his work. In the dissertation project, the larger dissertation project, which I have not written up, I have done a lot of work, like ethnographic trips. I've been to 6 provinces in Cambodia. We also went to Laos. I went with my father because he speaks Thai and he's translating for me. So I've done some field work, but not for this particular project. I'm really focused on so I use mixed methods in the larger dissertation project. So this particular project is really sort of my meditation on archives and how archives construct historical memory. And then also